What's your fertilizer plan for 2014? It's at this time of the year, every year, when we go through our fertility plan for the coming season. And I'm not saying that we make all our final plans, but at least we're getting everything roughly figured out and starting to buy our materials that we need for 2014.
See, I think people have figured you out by now, Brian. You're already working on 2015's program. You got 2016's in the back of your mind. I mean, this guy just loves to plan. And it is fun farming, and I realize, man, we've already made most of the decisions for this year. So, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna go to South America and start another crop, or are we gonna start thinking about our crop here for next year? Well, we're already looking at what is our profitability gonna be, and it's not just from a grain marketing standpoint, but it's also from buying the inputs. If we can buy the same inputs that we know we're gonna use for less money, why would you not do it? So that's what we're talking about today, getting a good deal on our fertility program, but also just thinking about what mistakes we made this year, what changes we want to make going into next year so we can do even better.
Now, when Darren's giving me a hard time for 2015 and 2016, no, I haven't put those together. I'm not a, no, seriously.
He's working on that next week.
No, I'm not a believer in doing that because I don't know what next year is going to bring. This year, the crop's already mostly made. I have a real good idea how much fertilizer we used, where our problems were, what we need to do going into next season, and certainly we're going to tweak that plan after we do soil tests this fall and when we get the last of our plant tissue analysis test results in from this year. But I can already see how the plant tissue did this year. I can already see kind of how the crop was doing. I already see where our weaknesses were, and I guess I'll just bring up one of the biggest things. All these seed companies are pushing you to plant higher corn populations, and we're doing that on our own farm. We're seeing good results from planting higher corn populations, but the problem is when you plant higher corn populations, you're going to force the corn to grow taller, and you've got a lot more plants out there using the same fertilizer you probably had last year, the same fertilizer plan you probably had last year. That's not a good thing. What happens a lot of times is we find our stalks to be too small to support big ears, and we have a lot more lodging problems in higher plant populations. So what do you need to do fertility-wise? You need to address potassium and maybe even some micronutrients.
Well, I think the cool thing about it, Brian, is as we push populations, it really just exposes our weaknesses. And maybe it is those things you talked about. Maybe it's something else. We don't know. But we're just going to go into the year with the best program we've got, trying to feed that higher population and hopefully continue to push yields. If we're getting 200 bushel corn now, we're not planning for 200 bushel corn next year. We're planning for 210 or we're planning for 220. We're going to keep pushing things a little bit, and you've always got to be just a little bit ahead. So if you're just putting on barely enough fertilizer for right where you're at now, you aren't going to be able to grow. You have hit a plateau and you're going to stay there. You've got to try and push that a little bit more. Now, we're also pushing with population, as Brian said, but you got to keep that fertility up to speed too.
And I'm not just going for 210 or 220 on some of this ground, I'm going for 300 long term. Now, I might not put enough nitrogen out for 300 because that's a short-term nutrient, but P and K, I can build my ground up, so eventually in, let's say, 3 years, I can get to 300 bushel corn. That's what I'm targeting. Okay, talking about your fertilizer program, here's our 3-step plan of action for you. Number 1, start planning right now for 2014 based on all the data that you have, past soil tests, tissue samples, field scouting, and knowing that chances are you're going to plant higher corn populations, for example. Any of that data, pull it together, just start going through field by field and say, well, I think I'm going to do this, I think I'm going to use these nutrients. Number 2, we want you to start looking at buying some fertility now. Typically, you're going to find the best prices of the season in August and September. It doesn't always work out that way, but I would say 8 years out of 10, that's usually when we find the seasonal lows. Number 3, tweak the plan after harvest this fall based on harvest data and soil test data. So once you've done those 3 things, you should have a pretty good plan going forward to next year.
That's a nice plan, Brian, but you left out one thing.
What's that?
Controlling our weight of the week. We'll show you how to stop this tough one coming up next.